right. Well, thank you to everyone here and for listening to our random chatter before we start. Just in case you aren't aware, though I suspect you are, this is the AIHEC Health Webinar Series, and we are just really grateful for everyone who is here today. For those who are returning, thank you so much for your continued support. We just really appreciate it. And for those who this is your first webinar attending as part of our series, welcome, and we hope you come back for more. We do have, I think we have at least the next 3 weeks in a row still we have webinars. So keep looking out for, notices,
Nice.
announcements, and come on back. So without any further delay, I am so excited to introduce to you all Dr. Shane Doyle. Dr. Shane Doyle is a Montana-based scholar, historian, writer, performing artist, and community advocate whose work focuses on the deep history and cultural heritage of the Indigenous people of the Northern Great Plains. Dr. Doyle holds a doctorate in curriculum and instruction from Montana State University and completed a postdoctoral research appointment in genetics with the University of Copenhagen in 2016. Dr. Doyle helped lead the Yellowstone revealed all nations Teepee village in the summer of 2022 and is currently a full-time educational and cultural consultant who specializes in Montana's Indian education for all curriculum. Shane lives with his wife and 5 children in Bozeman, Montana. So a huge thank you and welcome to Dr. Shane Doyle.
Oh, wow, cool. We've got someone from Bozeman. Awesome. Hi, Nora. Yeah, thanks so much, Maggie. Wow, it's very nice to meet you, and a great pleasure and honor to be part of this 50th AIHEC consortium deal that you're having here. It's interesting, there's a lot of 50th anniversaries that I've noticed that have come up. Maybe it's because I'm 51 or so, and all those things are kind of like in my frame of reference now. But a lot's happened in the past 50 years, and one of the things is American Indian self-determination. And I think AIHEC's 50th anniversary is probably pretty closely aligned with that whole self-determination era that we're in currently. And it's just so great to be a part of that, to live in this time. I feel very fortunate that my parents, my grandparents didn't have that opportunity. And just so happy to see people from all over joining today, and hope that I can share a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of insight and perspective about this topic. I want to thank Maggie again for inviting me, and Reno Charette reached out to me a while back and asked me if I would be interested in providing an hour-long talk about this topic. And so, of course, I thought this is a great opportunity to really share some of the more nuanced, I think, details about smallpox and how it really impacted Native people. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Let's see here. Start from the beginning. Whoops. This out of the way here. Am I doing? Oh, okay. Okay, so surviving smallpox was strength, wisdom, and resilience. And one of the, I think, focuses of these talks is to really highlight how Native people have survived and been resilient through some of the most devastating times, illnesses, everything else under the sun, that we've been through here on this continent. And we still are still here. And you think about, I've always kind of thought about how the United States of America is just such a powerful nation, and around the world, just kind of dominated the globe in the 20th century. And into the 21st century, and yet that country was built, on native land, and we're the ones who had to endure, this juggernaut, the United States of America, this war machine, this like cultural phenomenon that really came to us and landed on us. And of course, although we've been a part of it and we participated in many ways as part of the American experience, largely that experience has been one of colonialism. And, we're hoping to change that as we go into the 21st century. But I think reflecting back on how our communities did survive smallpox, it's really a good chance to think about that strength, the wisdom, and the resilience that came from our ancestors. All the thousands of years that they lived here in a sustainable way of life. Um, you know, they were long lived. People historically on this continent, I think, lived to be pretty old. They had very low rates of disease. They had really good lives overall, healthy, and they left a lot of lessons for us, life lessons through a lot of different ways. And I like to think about those things when we come up with topics like smallpox. And so I'm just going to go ahead and move on here. Some of the essential understandings: what is smallpox? How did smallpox impact Native people? Why were some Native people able to survive smallpox? And what have we learned from smallpox? So these are some of the things I want to speak to. And, I don't have a lot of slides. So I just kind of want to go ahead and speak to some of this stuff from the heart. First of all, what is smallpox? Smallpox, kind of reflecting on the Columbian Exchange here. The Columbian Exchange, in this title, in this presentation, the Columbian Disease Exchange, thinking about what diseases were exchanged after Christopher Columbus came to America. And really, by far and away, most of the diseases that were passed across the ocean came from the old world over here to the new world. And smallpox is the one that I think probably killed the most people here on this continent and also South America. So it's a deadly virus. It's at least 3,000 years old. We know it's that old because, and I'm going to go ahead and bring my screen up. We know it's that old because we have evidence from Egyptian tombs of Egyptians that died of smallpox 3,000 years ago, and we know from other historical accounts that smallpox got passed around all over Europe and Asia. Mostly, I think in Central Asia, it was first recorded in China around, I think, the 4th or 5th century. So that was about 1,500 years ago. So, we know from archaeology that it's much older than that, but we know from written records that people were experiencing this disease, these outbreaks of smallpox over all across Eurasia, Central Asia, up into what we know as Russia, now over into Europe, down into Africa, North Africa. There were very few places that were untouched by smallpox. And so, after hundreds of years of this disease developing, and its origins are kind of a mystery, we really don't know which animal it came from or how exactly it was passed. It devastated populations around the old world, what we call the old world, which is not a good title, but we use it just out of convenience. But in Eurasia, Africa, those areas had been dealing with smallpox for, a good 2, 3,000 years before it came to America. And I think the other thing to remember about that whole disease exchange is that it wasn't just smallpox that was coming from the from Europe and Asia. It was a whole host of diseases, and pretty much all of them came from uh, domesticated animals. And so we know that smallpox is a bovine disease. One of the reasons why we know it's a bovine disease is because uh, when the vaccine was first discovered in the 1800s, it was discovered through milkmaids who milked cows. And they used to get this virus called cowpox. And the cowpox would get them, they would have a runny nose, and they would get a fever, and it would be a mild cold that they would have from the cowpox. And they got it primarily because they were so involved with touching the animals and drinking the milk and everything, just close up all the time. And virologists, one of the very first virologists at the time, Louis Pasteur, discovered that these women who first got this cowpox virus became immune to smallpox. So when outbreaks would happen, smallpox outbreaks would occur, these people who worked with these cows would never get sick. And he thought that was really interesting. And so that was one of the ways that he discovered the vaccine for smallpox. They started using the same vaccine, or the same um, antibodies that were developed through cowpox, and injecting them into people to make them immune to smallpox. And that was in the early 1800s. And in fact, by the time smallpox really became, a huge plague here on this continent, and at least here on the northern plains, there had already been a virus that had been developed, decades before that. So that's another thing to consider, is that, when we think about smallpox purposefully killing off native people here, there was a virus for that disease at the time. At least here in Montana, there was a virus here. I mean, we didn't have it here, but I mean, in an alternative history, white people could have, helped native people um, with that whole process. But of course, that's not how history played out. So anyway, again, back to the whole idea of how smallpox is connected to bovine animals. We don't know, again, how that virus first developed, some kind of a cow or some kind of ungulate that people over in Central Asia or Africa were trying to domesticate at the time. And that whole process of domestication of animals, sheep, goats, pigs, chickens, that whole culture that involved, um, you know, kind of not, I guess, subjugating animals, um, using them for your economic purposes. As we see today, like the farm and ranch culture that developed in Central Asia and all throughout Europe, was a culture that was really so closely linked to animals that there were a lot of diseases that kept coming up all the time. And, we could think about typhoid, typhus, um, cholera. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of different diseases that Europeans brought to America that native people didn't have immunities to, because we didn't have that way of life here. We were not, um, living in close quarters with animals, aside from dogs. And I think, South America, you have llamas, but really, in Europe where people were actually sharing living quarters with their animals, that's how a lot of these diseases came about. And in the wintertime, when it got really cold and they had to bring their animals into their house to keep them from freezing, that a lot of the diseases that we know of today that are common were developed during that time. And that just wasn't the way of life here in America. Um, so kind of in short, kind of to sum it up, that's really what smallpox is. It's a disease that came from animals, and it sounds a lot like COVID-19, and when you think about it that way, because we know that COVID-19 came from an animal. We don't know what animal yet. We don't know a lot of things about how COVID-19 came about, but one thing we know for sure is that it came from an animal. And if we hadn't been interacting with those animals, that's one way we could have avoided that disease. I'm not saying that we shouldn't interact with animals, but I'm just saying that's going to be part and parcel of what comes about when we, share close space with these wild animals, or at one time wild and now domestic. So thinking about how did smallpox impact Native people, it devastated Native people population-wise. I don't know if we'll ever really know completely the number of people that smallpox actually killed. I think there's a lot of estimates out there. There's a wide range of estimates. When we think about how many people could have been in America during the time uh, before Columbus landed, there's a lot of different estimates, and I don't know if we'll ever know for sure, or maybe someday in the future we'll have the technology to know that number. But I know it was in the tens of millions. I know it had to have been over 10 million people at least, and that's on the low end here in North America. And when you think about the fact that by 1900, I think there were less than 100,000 native people left on this continent, that is almost unbelievable. There's never been anything like it in world history. The number of people that died on this continent um, in such a short space, such a short amount of time, and not from bullets, not from rifles or cannons, but from diseases. And a lot of these people that died from smallpox never even saw a white man because the diseases were passed, ahead of them, ahead of the white people. Either maybe they first came through a blanket, but once it comes into the community, the blanket is no longer needed because people exchange it, through their breath, through close quarters with one another. So it could have come from a variety of different ways. The other thing to consider about smallpox is that every community was impacted differently. And that's one of the topics I really wanted to talk about today here on the Northern Plains. So when smallpox first came, the first big epidemic was said to have happened around 1837. And during that time, it's believed that there were blankets that were infected and some other trade items that came from a steamboat that had come up the Missouri River and landed somewhere around Fort Benton, or somewhere around central Montana. And that outbreak is believed to have killed off at least half of all Native people in Montana. Just that one outbreak. That was 1837. That same outbreak, though, that killed off probably at least half of all Native people in Montana, or probably likely more, killed off what we believe to be 90% of all of the folks who lived in the Knife River villages along the Missouri River, what we know of today around the three affiliated tribes at Newtown, North Dakota. And the reason why those people were so heavily impacted by smallpox is because they all lived together in dome homes and in earthen homes, and they grew corn along the Missouri River. The area where they grew corn now is all flooded, most of it, by the dam that was built back in the 1940s that created Lake Sacagawea. But before that dam was there, the earthen villages were down below the river, not high up above, but down below in the river valley. And the people who lived there had a huge trade network that revolved around them because they were a conduit from people coming from the Great Plains that were connected to the Rocky Mountains, and people coming from the east, from the Great Lakes, all along the Missouri and Mississippi River valleys, and would trade at that center there. And when the smallpox got to that community, um, as I mentioned, 90% of those people perished because they were not able to isolate and separate from one another and have social distancing because their lifestyle uh, was centered on agriculture and trade in that one spot. And, you know, when you think about how that compares and contrasts to native people here in Montana, you know, when the disease came here in 1837, when people started getting sick, the tribes here split, they dispersed, you know, and they were already used to going their separate ways because of, you know, they were attuned to finding their own winter campsites, which changed from year to year. Also harvesting their own herds of bison and wild plants. They had alliances with different neighbors that were particular to those specific groups. So they had a lot of different things that they did throughout the year with different people. They moved around a lot here in Montana, and that's, you know, still even today, you know, we're driving around all the time in the summer, even in the winter. But you know, and they also understood, they very much understood disease theory in that when people get sick, you need to get away. People need to, you know, separate, get away from each other. That's how you stay healthy. And so that's the reason why when the smallpox came in 1837, we didn't lose 90% of our population in Montana, was because we split up. And we understood that, you know, by staying together, you can virtually guarantee that everyone will get sick. And so, you know, the question that kind of leads into the next question: why were some Native people able to survive smallpox? You know, I think there were people who contracted the disease who survived it. I don't think very many. I think it killed, I think, like 90% of the people who got it. But there were some people who survived it, and those who didn't get it, of course, survived because of their strategies, as I just mentioned, to the distance from one another. And I think, you know, what have we learned from smallpox? You know, well, that's a question I think that we can continue to ponder for a while. But you know, one of the things that we've learned, of course, is that it's important to socially distance. And you know, that became an issue here in America with COVID-19. And even without social distancing, when we tried to, uh, when when public health authorities tried to mitigate social distancing by asking people to wear masks in public spaces, even that was a difficult thing to achieve because people, for whatever reason, either didn't believe or didn't want to take those measures to protect themselves and their communities. And as we all know, here in Montana, that was not the case in Native communities. Native communities isolated right away from the very beginning. We were the first people to get vaccinated. Um, there, if you look back and reflect on how Native communities responded to COVID-19, I think we did all we could to protect ourselves and our elders. And I think that those are lessons that we learned from smallpox. And, maybe it's been so long since smallpox occurred in our communities that, people don't have that memory anymore of those times, but we still talk about it. Um, it's not something that uh, people today don't have knowledge about, and I think it's probably something that most non-native people don't know anything about whatsoever. But in Indian country, we know we've taken lessons from smallpox. We understand the importance of being smart and being safe. And I'm just going to kind of move on again to this idea about the Northern Plains people and diseases. For here in Montana, uh, tribal people, we really practice a very clean, healthy lifestyle. In my tribe, I'm a member of the Apsáalooke Nation. All of the elders talk about taking a bath every morning. Regardless of the temperature, regardless if it was in a winter. Sweat baths are common. They're the most ubiquitous ceremony here in Montana. There's 7 reservations here in Montana, but every one that you go to, you'll see people at any time of the year, at any time of the day, building a sweat on any given day of the week. You'll see the fire burning, and that someone's preparing the rocks to go into that sweat lodge. And what that sweat lodge does is keep us healthy. We sweat out our impurities and all those other physical things, but there's also a spiritual element to it, and a ceremonial aspect that enriches us. And it's something that's been passed for a very long time. And I think, it was used, it's always been used, but even during the time of smallpox and when all the diseases were coming through and devastating our communities, sweat lodges were very much a part of that healing and keeping it together, keeping our ceremonial ways alive. And when a lot of them were made illegal, during that colonial time, people continued to sweat, and they continued to maintain a clean, healthy lifestyle, way of life, and it's reflected in how we maintained our own personal appearances with our hair. We had braided hair. We didn't leave our hair all uncombed and shabby. We took care of our clothes. We took care of our bodies, and we took care of our personal surroundings, and that was part of staying healthy. We didn't leave food laying around. There was many different uh, daily habits that we practiced that kept us healthy. And one of those things again was taking a bath every morning. And you get into that cold water. It's really good for your immune system. It triggers your white blood cells to react. It helps your heart and your mind to just maintain that upbeat approach to the day. And it starts first thing in the morning. And so that was taught. I know that many Crow people were taught that, and I know that my tribe is not the only one that believes in that. And I think that that's not necessarily the case with the colonial culture that brought smallpox along with it. These were folks who used to brag about not taking baths, for months and months at a time. And there were also other aspects of that culture, that way of life, that colonial way of life that really differed greatly from just the daily habits and routines of Northern Plains people. You know, when horses were brought to tribal people here in Montana, that was a big deal because that was the first time people were really maintaining and um, you know, taking care of these big animals. You know, they had had dogs before, but I think that was a whole nother aspect that came on with you know, colonization. One that, you know, we found a love for horses and to continue to love horses today. But you know, figuring out how do we live with these animals in a healthy, clean way is something I think that Native people immediately had to start thinking about. And you know, how do they winter their horses? Where do they keep them? How do they feed them? You know, how do they remove, you know, the waste and stuff? You know, those are, I think those are just good examples of how, you know, the ceremonial way of life that Native people lived here was also a healthy way of life. And that made us vulnerable to diseases that came from the ocean, from communities that didn't practice those same values. And but it also made us resilient in the face of all those things. And in the face of huge loss, we were able to still, you know, find our strength and continue forward. So again, kind of, you know, reflecting back on the resilience and wisdom. Um, whoops, here on the Great Plains. Uh, you know, these areas, I think some of these photographs of this landscape here in Montana, these are places where, you know, Native people lived, but practiced a ceremonial way of life. And that ceremonial way of life uh, appreciates and accepts and embraces all the things around us as part of that web of life. And I think that, you know, we've used that to overcome, to be resilient in the face of diseases. I think it showed with COVID-19 again when you know, we weren't trying to um, you know, we didn't place our individual concerns over the safety of our community. And I think that's part of the wisdom that comes from being you know, part of our culture. I wanted to share another lesson plan. Break this down. Well, let me share my screen again here. During the pandemic, I was asked by the Montana OPI to develop some lesson plans um, for students here in Montana that they could do at home over their computer. And one of the things that I wanted to introduce them to was a historic site in Billings called the Sacrifice Cliff. And the Sacrifice Cliff uh, is named after an event that occurred um, probably, I think it was in the 1850s. So remember I told you there was a first big outbreak of smallpox around the 1830s. There had been a small one in the 1780s, and then another one in the 1850s. Um, so, you know, this lesson plan gives kids the details on all of that. This is up online at the OPI website. But I wanted to teach them about the Sacrifice Cliff because there's a lot of great lessons about Native people and Crow people to be proud of that come with this story. So the story, and I put some links in here to a story that was in the our local newspaper, Billings, the Billings Gazette, because Sacrifice Cliff is right there in Billings, and it's a little city park Oh my gosh, now it's gonna ask me to log in. Oh no. Suppose it's gonna do that to the kids too. Anyway, the story, and I'll just tell it to you. The story is that smallpox hit this Crow village that we're living around in Billings there above there's some rim rocks that sit above the Yellowstone River. I think we have a high resolution image here. There they are. So the story is that when the pandemic, when the smallpox came to the Crow tribe, there was a camp, there was a little village that was located up on top of this cliff here towards the back. That's the Yellowstone River there, known to all the tribes here as the Elk River. And the story is that two men that were gone, I believe they were brothers, cousins. I can't remember how they were related, but um, they had gone off hunting, and while they were gone, the smallpox came to their little family, their little community, and many families were infected by it. And when they returned to the camp, most of the people had died. Um, Pretty much everyone had died. The only ones that were there had left. I think there were just like a very few that had survived and were no longer there. And so these men were so overcome with grief, and then also knowing that after they had returned and had interacted with, you know, the items and stuff there at the village, that they had probably acquired the smallpox themselves. They didn't want to pass it along to anybody, so they decided to sacrifice themselves, and so they, in honor of their family, of their village, so that they could, try and maintain the Crow tribe, so that they wouldn't continue to pass this disease along. So the story is they blindfolded their horses and they rode them off that cliff there. And there's a bronze statue at the Western Heritage Center in Billings, and it shows the men on horseback going over the cliff. So it's a pretty well-known story. It's again, it's a city park in Billings, and I think it reflects on, again, that idea that you know it's more important when there's a crisis in the community. It's more important to to put our focus on the community and the best interests of the community over our own personal ones. And that's a value that is a ceremonial value, because it's not based on a selfish desire. So I'm going to go ahead. Let's see. I want to go back to the lesson plan again. This lesson plan here, I include, a map of Montana, the different reservations. You can see where they are today. When the first smallpox epidemic occurred, it came along right around here near the present-day town of Great Falls. But back in those days, the steamships couldn't go over the big falls there. There's a huge waterfall. That's the city got its name after there on the Yellowstone or the Missouri River. So the steamboats would only go to about right here at Fort Benton, and that's where they unloaded, and where these epidemics would kind of, central location for the epidemics to go out and about. And then, here in Billings is where the Sacrifice Cliff story happened. I also looked again at the epidemic over North Dakota. If you want to look more into that, there's a lot of lessons and other information on the North Dakota website. But it occurred to me through this surveying and researching and looking at all these different websites and numbers that the people who lived in the villages had it much worse. I mean, they almost every single one of them died almost. I mean, it was just unbelievable. just densely populated. They were not able to like disperse and go off and hide for months and months at a time. That's what the crows did. A lot of them didn't see each other for like 6, 7 months. They would just go off to winter campsites and they would be, we'll see you in the spring. I hope you survive. And that's the way they did it. And they came out of it okay. I mean, they were devastated by it, but at least they had some semblance of their communities left after all of that. And it's really, I think, a testimony to their wisdom and their knowledge. And the other thing about, disease theory, that they understood how diseases were passed. And they didn't, understand what a germ or a microbe was. They didn't have that kind of scientific knowledge, but they had native science. They had wisdom and common sense, which is, if you're hanging out in a room full of people that are sick, you're going to get sick. And if you don't get sick, you're lucky. I mean, that's what it boils down to. So just a lot of good lessons, I think, that we can take from how Native people responded and how they were kind of, the fate that they had to endure because of the lifestyles that they lived. And you think about, you know, other tribes outside of the Great Plains, like the tribes in the Northwest Coast who lived in the longhouses, or the Iroquois who lived in longhouses, or the Southwest who lived in, the little villages, the pueblos, um, or most other places around the continent where Native people lived in the same house all year. Those were the ones who were devastated most by smallpox. And I think when you look at the Great Plains people who were always moving, always moving throughout the year, even in the winter, you know, some people, I mean, it's easy to assume that they got into a winter campsite and they just stayed there from, October through March. But that's not the case. They actually moved during the winter. They took advantage of different opportunities. They didn't know what the weather would be like. So I think they kind of played it by ear. And these were highly mobile people. And that's a lesson I think that we can take. What does that mobility provide us in terms of protection when we're faced with a plague or epidemic? Those are interesting things to think about. So I think I'll go ahead and pause there and give folks an opportunity. Or before I do that, actually, one more website I can peruse. Oh, I guess I can't. I had some links up there, but maybe some of them have expired. Does anyone have any questions or would like me to talk about anything else at all?
So I was hoping you could clarify. I have something correct, and then I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So at the beginning of your presentation, you said that and this was an estimate and probably on the lower end, but over 10 million Native people died from smallpox, with less than 100,000 Native people remaining around 1900. Did I capture that correctly?
That's what I believe. Whoops,
Okay.
wrong one. Yeah, I think that's the one that whoops, I'm getting the wrong one too. Those are the numbers that I think are probably most accurate. Um, but I will say, there are folks who have gone much higher. I've heard researchers say 50 million, or more, 100 million. But just from all the research that I've done over the years about Native communities, and the overall amount of data that we've gathered, I kind of tend to fall on towards the 10 million side, but I don't know. I mean, I think it's anyone's guess, honestly. But one thing we know for sure is that, by the time the 20th century rolls around, we're down to like 100,000.
which are just, those
Thanks.
are staggering numbers in both directions, just really outrageous.
Yeah,
So
and
then,
so well, I was going to say, follow up and say that's not just smallpox, that's typhoid, typhus, that's cholera, that's all those diseases. It's also starvation. But when the bison were killed off, there were over 1,000 people that starved to death here in Montana in 1884. There's also warfare. Um, I mean, so that when we get down to that 100,000 number, you have to throw a lot of different, deadly factors in there.
hmm, okay, okay, wow. Um, okay, so then my question, I was curious, were there any, at any point in time, were there any sort of vaccination efforts for smallpox for Native people, considering that there was a known cure? No.
That was one of the questions I had when I first studied this topic was, if there was a vaccine available, you know, why wasn't it provided to Native people? And I understand, it wasn't the friendliest relations, but like I said, if things had been different, you can imagine a world where, white people would have the common decency to share this vaccine with their, the people who live on this land. But of course, we know that that wasn't their intention. And I'll also go further and say that it typically wasn't, I mean, when we think about who first engaged with Native people here in the West, it wasn't like your average white guys. It was the military. It was the army. They were out here. They wanted to take this land and they wanted to get rid of the Indians. And so I think, they used that disease to help them in their process of cleansing the land of Native people. They knew that it would work because it had been so successful in other places. And even across the ocean, I think even during the Crusades, smallpox played a role in that.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, I was just, it seems like someone somewhere would have said, hey, let's, offer this, but yeah,
No, I
what are
know.
you thinking? Yeah.
And I suppose, logistically, but I think, I thought about it. Like, let's say you set up a vaccination station at like a trade hub, and you told Native people, get vaccinated while you're here to pick up these different trade items. It could have worked that way, I think,
Mm.
because other people were getting vaccinated and it was available. The technology was available, but I think it was used as a weapon. And during that same time, you know, the army was also trying to kill off all the bison over here because they understood there was no way to militarily defeat the Plains Indians because they were too mobile.
Mm.
And the only way to really, constrict their mobility was to eliminate their food source. And so that's, the smallpox and the killing off of the bison, I think those things are both tools that the US Army used in their fight against a superior military force, which were the Plains Indians.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that answer.
Absolutely. Thank you for the great question. I hope I was able to kind of cover some of the main concepts and topics to just kind of wrap your head around, you know, what really happened here. I mean, it really is hard to imagine what it must have been like to see all your relatives die at that time if you were living here and to still find a way to go on, to carry on. Um, and and I think that, you see a lot of one of the things that I've experienced a lot today is white people want to know, they want to, you know, learn about all these native, cultural aspects and history and everything, but they don't understand that, we've been just so devastated by disease and boarding schools and everything else that, a lot, we lost a lot during that time. And I think it's important that we are able to, every Native kid is able to understand that, because until you really understand that, you don't really know how we got to this point. And it's a burden to carry as a Native kid. You don't know how or why you ended up in this situation as a Native person, and why your communities have been so, devastated. And we need this knowledge to help us heal.
Well, and we appreciate, you coming and helping spread that knowledge to others. That's part of what this series is about. And I do want to mention we're actually creating a short course for anyone who's interested. It's in the very, very beginning stages, but about epidemics in Indian country. Just
Mm,
because we recognize the importance of making sure that people are aware of these types of diseases that came through and just eviscerated Native communities, and then also what's happening kind of on the other side, and how are people um, moving forward, and what they're doing in their own native ways to support health and wellness. So look for that to come. That's another thing we're offering with our health webinar series. I do want to ask, does anyone have, I took up like all the question time. Does anyone else have questions or comments that they would like to, and feel free to unmute yourself or anything in the chat.
Maggie, while we're waiting for anyone, well, I will say that, I believe one of the big lessons I think that many of us took was that Native people believe strongly in science,
Mhm.
because they understand the power of science and what it can do to keep us healthy. And, it was just so ironic to me to see, white people throughout America questioning the vaccine, but Native people, understanding that, this is cutting edge science. This is like the best we have. And, why would we doubt these healthcare professionals? I mean, you had a few people who were skeptical, but the vast majority of Native people, they got vaccinated right away because they knew that that was the best thing. Um, and I just think that's so ironic, because science has been used against us, and education has been used against us for so long. And for us to still see the wisdom and understanding the value of not rejecting all of it, and accepting, what's best in our best interest. Those are Native values that I'm proud to talk about and try and emulate.
Yeah, well, and I think that really speaks to wisdom that we
Hmm.
don't always, in kind of the mainstream general society, or there's this lack of just a base understanding wisdom. And I think in
Yep.
Native communities, there's a greater appreciation for wisdom, and fostering that wisdom. So definitely,
Yes.
definitely. Um, okay, well, I think we don't have any more questions. Something comes up in the last minute while I'm talking, feel free to come up. Dr. Shane Doyle, thank you so much for being here with us today. And I think that's it for me. Anybody, anything else? Dr. Shane Doyle, anything else from you?
No, just thank you so much, and just keep going. I mean, I love to see this. It's an honor to be a part of it, and I'm just really thankful for all the great work that all of you are doing. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to everyone here with us today. We so appreciate you. Next week, we do have Marcia Small is presenting. She's speaking
Mm.
on the boarding schools and the
Mm.
Native children who are left behind in those cemeteries. So join us next week. It's the same registration, and We will have this posted. We're kind of a little slower and steady getting these edited, but we will have all of these posted in our digital library pretty soon. So thank you so much, Shane. Thank you so much, all of you who joined us today, and we will see you all again, hopefully very soon. All right.
Yep.
Take
care,
care.
Maggie.
Bye.
Yeah, see
Thank
ya.
you.
Bye. Thank you.